Get this to the cloud this time. So we left off kind of around here last class, but a couple of things to go through before we kind of dive into material. We should have more than enough time today to kind of complete all the module 1 topics. I'll probably even show and kind of work through a couple of those practice problems, of which I'll get the answer key posted up after class. I typically won't do that. That's what you'll have to go to the CL sessions for, kind of starting next week. So next Thursday will be the first CL session. After talking with all of my UGIs, I have it kind of organized. Didn't work out perfectly. I don't have 3 at every single time slot, but pretty close to perfect. There's only 1 time slot, the last one on Sunday, where there's only 2 locations. And then one of the time slots on Thursday, there's actually going to be 4 locations, right? So I think it'll work out because I think it's going to be a more heavily trafficked time on that. It's kind of like the middle of that Thursday time block. So once again, you can get those CL preferences done by the end of the day, Sunday. It looks like a little quiz on Canvas. It's not for any points. It's just if you want to plan on attending. First of all, I like knowing kind of what are going to be the most trafficked times. That helps me out, kind of talk to my UGIs and kind of work things out with them a little bit. But also it's just a way I can guarantee you'll have a seat there. That doesn't by no means doesn't mean when I assign you to a day and time that you always have to go to that one. It's just that I'm kind of, protecting against anyone telling me, well, I showed up and there weren't any seats. Well, I got your preferences kind of collected. I can get you all into each one of your preferred. That will never be an issue. Now in practice, I mentioned this on Tuesday, they're never full. So there's always available seats. So you can always go to ones and change it the next week or go to a different day or time. This is just kind of starting out to get things set up. Okay. And I'll post exactly a little Excel file so you can see exactly what time slot I'm talking about. It is the last one, Sunday, where there's only 2 locations. It'll kind of show what room availability or what rooms are going to be available, what times. I'll post that to Canvas after class today as well. Okay. I write things down so I don't forget because I've got too many classes going on. So the other thing that some people have reached out, I'm aware of the issue. So Top Hat, those first 2 modules, I think for some reason a setting defaulted to something that it didn't used to. So it used to be prior to submission, even those ones where there's no right or wrong answer, it would show you getting full points. Right now, it's not doing that. So the most you can get on both assignments right now is 2.25 points. So if you look on there and that's how many points you have, it'll switch over to 4 once that due date passes. From here on out, I know that the setting has to be kind of changed from the default. And so we shouldn't have any issues moving forward with those questions where there is no correct answer. And really, after the first 2 modules, most of the questions are going to be ones where there is a correct answer. They'll look more like multiple choice questions or a question where you have to type in a number or something like that. Right? So I apologize for that, but that should get updated probably, like I said, after the due date. So by the time we meet next Tuesday, that should be updated. Yep. Yeah, so it's a good question. First of all, I think I reiterated, you can only get it once a week, right? So you can't go like 4 a week and get 1 for each one. It's 0.25 every single week. But whoever the instructor is there, generally what I have them do, and maybe I'll do it a little bit differently. They can have, if it was me, I would probably keep track of it on an Excel file, but they'll probably just have like a piece of paper. They'll have everybody who shows up write their name down, right? And they can kind of verify, right, like that you're only writing in one name. Like I kind of told them this because I know that people like to be tricky. So you'll write your name down as you kind of come in, and then they'll take that list. I have an Excel file. They go through, put check marks next to every single person's name that showed up. I kind of save this throughout the semester, so it's all in one place. That was probably more detail than you wanted, but any other questions before we kind of get started here? Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good question. So once you answer the question, it automatically is like submitting it for you. So once you click on an answer, that's like a submission, right? So each question, as you're working through them, it's as soon as you type something in, it counts that as though you have a response to that question. So there is no like submit button at the very end. Is that what you're asking? And I do know on module 2, there is one question. I forgot this. It's a bug in it. It asks you to select all that apply. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's every single person's having this issue or if it's just certain web browsers. It's only allowing you to choose one. As long as you choose one of all that apply, as long as you're getting one of those, it should give you the full points for the problem. Okay. I'd actually sent an email about that and not really sure because on my end, it looks like it's set up, everything's working correctly. but I've had some people reach out that they're only able to choose one of those answers instead of multiple. Okay. Any other kind of housekeeping stuff before we dive into material? Yeah, like I said, I use those to try to kind of prime you. It can be good. I mean, it would be helpful if you do kind of go through it. There's something that kind of, it's kind of, I don't really understand that. Maybe write it down so that when we talk about it in class, you know, you're a little bit more focused and really paying attention when we're talking about that topic. But I wouldn't say, you know, like you have to take notes. You know, there's a lot of things you could study 20 hours a week, but we'll talk a little bit today. You know, by the time you study those first 5 or 6, each additional hour probably isn't that much productive for you. So it's something you can do, but I don't necessarily think you have to. Yeah. So it just needs to be a calculator that you can't program on. So it can't be anything in which you could store notes or anything. Well, you can. So the 84 you can store like notes and stuff in, right?
No, it's fine.
Okay. I think there's ways of doing it. You may not be aware of the notes, but you can like put things in. So anything that doesn't have strings. So I mean, you won't need anything more than when I say for function, you literally just need to add, subtract, divide, and multiply. Yep. I mean, you could probably go to the 5 below or something and get a calculator that would work for this class. Any other questions from me? Yeah. So what are the practice problems are going to be things I put out ahead of the quiz that you can study that was similar to the quiz, right? So those are currently already up. Oh, here it is. On Canvas, so you can we'll open them up later, but you can always see those questions before the quiz is even available to you, okay? They aren't the quiz questions, they're similar though, they're to prepare you. Any other questions? A lot of murmurings. Good. Okay. All right. So we'll dive into the material here. So we talked about self-interest or social interest last class, I believe. Let's start with opportunity cost. And we'll kind of review that and then kind of jump into some more in-depth details with that. So the idea of opportunity cost is anytime I do something, right? If I choose to buy something, if I choose to go do something, I'm always giving up doing something else, right? So if I spend $1 on a bottle of water, that's $1 I could have spent on something else. And whatever else I could have bought, that would have some value to me, right? That would have brought me some level of happiness. Same kind of thing with time, right? I've got 24 hours in a day. If I choose to come to class today, I had to give up that hour doing something that I might have found valuable. You know, I don't know, go hang out with friends or do whatever you want to do with that hour, right? Excuse me. So when we choose to do something, what we're giving up, the value of that, that's what we're saying is our opportunity cost, right? So I think the example, I don't know, that I really liked and I gave last class was we said, let's say someone gives you a completely free ticket to a concert, and they're willing to drive you there, everything, right? It's completely free. There's no money that you're handing over, right? But you could have worked a 5-hour shift during that time, and all the money that you could have been earning, you're no longer earning. That's your opportunity cost, right? So a lot of times with these opportunity costs, it's not going to be something that you're physically handing money over for, right? We dive into this a little bit deeper later on the semester, but those are what we call an explicit cost, right? When I go buy a bottle of water, I have to hand over money for it. That's an explicit cost. Opportunity cost is what I'm giving up, what I'm not doing. So it never really, and I never actually do it, right? I'm giving up not doing it. And so it's going to be like almost think about it as like a hypothetical, not hypothetical. It's like I'm not doing this and I could have received some value for that, but I no longer am. All right. So no money is going to be in exchange, but it still is a cost to us. Okay. So we said no such thing as a free lunch, right? It's kind of the age-old adage in economics. So we can start to think about what this looks like, look at some different scenarios, and maybe this will make a little more sense, right? So let's say I'm thinking about what apartment I want to rent, and I'm a little bit further removed, and I went to a different college, which I probably shouldn't tell you which one, since you guys are all IU students, but maybe you can guess. So, but I remember like having to make rental decisions literally now, like for next year, like within this next month, like things go really, really quick, right? So you're thinking about what apartment to rent, and you have three different options. Right? These numbers are probably also way too, I don't know, low, but I don't know the rental market in Bloomington too well. I should probably look that up. So if I had these three apartments to choose from, which one, assuming, right, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how we make some of these assumptions sometimes in economics. Let's say they're the exact same apartment, right? Physically, they're the same size, same amenities, everything's exactly the same, right? Which one would you choose? Yeah, the cheapest one, right? It has the lowest sticker cost, right? So a lot of times people will make decisions and they incorrectly, they choose suboptimally. So if you chose apartment C here, it could be that you actually were making a choice where you weren't the best off that you could be. Why? Because what if these are in different locations, right? Well, if I'm closer to campus, I'm giving up less of my time throughout the entire semester, I might value that time, right? And I can put a dollar amount to how much I would pay in order to get that amount of time back, right? So why do people pay a lot more money to live closer to campus? Because they get back a lot of time. And there is a cost to giving up your time. Right? So we're not just going to be concerned with like the money that we're handing over for the apartment, like the rental price, that it's part of the cost, but we also want to factor in these opportunity costs. Now, this is kind of a weird example because obviously, like, you know, how do you value time? Everybody values time differently, but we all know that we would pay some amount of money to get some of our time back in certain situations, right? So let's just, for the sake of this example, say that we all value time at $10 an hour, right? In order to get an hour back, you know, in our life, we pay $10 for it, right? Instead of just walking to and from campus. Although, I don't know, this is a beautiful enough campus, like walking to and from is kind of enjoyable. Well, not right now. In the fall, it's much more enjoyable. I know you're mostly freshmen, so you'll have to take me at my word, but it's a lot more enjoyable when it cools down. So we can look at each one of those apartments that are in different locations, and each one is going to have a different opportunity cost because they had to give up more time, right, in living in each one of them, or different ones of them. So I'm going to take this opportunity cost, and I'm now going to add that to the rental cost to get my kind of total cost if I choose to live in that apartment, right? I'm going to have to pay a certain amount of rent, and I'm going to have to give up some of my time, which has value to me. So now if I'm looking at this, what apartment would be optimal for me to choose? Apartment B, right? It has the lowest total cost. Our total cost should be factoring in also these opportunity costs, what I'm giving up by making that decision, okay? What do you think happens? My time is then instead valued at twice as much. Which apartment starts to become more and more attractive? The one that's close, right? Because now as my time is more valuable, I'm going to start making decisions. I'll spend a little bit more money in order to avoid giving up as much of my time, right? So we could do the same kind of math here, figure out the opportunity cost if we value our time a little bit more. Now, the optimal decision would be to choose apartment A. So we started out, when we weren't factoring in opportunity costs at all, we were choosing apartment C. That would have been suboptimal. And as we value our time more and more, our decision, what's going to be optimal, is going to switch more and more towards things that are closer to campus. Okay. Is that any questions on that before we keep moving here? So you can kind of think about like, I forget who it was, one of these ultra billionaires or whatever, like they're explaining why they need their own private jet. I think it was Cuban, Mark Cuban. But anyways, they were saying, you know, they're like, oh, well, you know, why do you spend all this money? Don't you think? And he's like, look, the amount of time that I would have to spend waiting for commercial airlines, do you know how much money I could make with that time? I mean, and he's not lying. He makes so much money that it actually made sense for him economically, right? He would have been better off if he bought his, even though it's a huge sticker price, he bought his own plane, right? Because that opportunity cost of flying commercial, right, giving up all that time was huge, right? Way larger than the sticker price of whatever plane he bought. So we can kind of see this stuff play out in the real world when people are making decisions. But that being said, sometimes, how to put this kindly? Sometimes people don't make optimal decisions because they don't have kind of the intellectual ability to really grasp this concept of opportunity cost, right? And so a lot of times we see people working at kind of the edge. You're working, you know, harder, not smarter, right? They'll be doing things where they think that they're saving money. They're choosing the thing that has the lowest sticker price, but in doing so, they're creating a lot more work for themselves, a lot more time, and end up, you know, this huge opportunity cost, and they're actually making decisions suboptimal. So we'll kind of see how this plays out in slightly different context here also in just a second. So we've got these opportunity costs. We also are then going to think about, now that I can actually determine the total cost, right? I've factored in this value of what I'm giving up. We're going to talk about something called marginal costs. So this word of marginal just means additional, right? So we think about the marginal cost, and it's kind of a weird one. I'm going to stick with the apartment example, but let's say I'm currently living in this apartment. Now I've made the rent consistent across all three. So change the example a little bit, but they all have different commuting costs, right? Excuse me. So if I wasn't factoring in the opportunity costs, I'm like, oh, I choose this apartment. You know, that's going to be the best one. And lo and behold, even if I factor in the opportunity cost, it was the best option. What would the additional cost be to me if I switched from the current apartment to apartment 2? Well, I'd be going from spending $1,120 to $1,240. So what was the additional cost there? $120, right? All you're doing with your marginal cost is you're thinking about what the change in my total cost be. So here, if I went to apartment 3, the change in my total cost would just be the difference between these total costs for $240. So not quite the same thing, right? We need to first factor in our, I call them commuting costs here, but we need to factor in our opportunity costs. And then once we have the total cost, we can determine what our marginal cost would be from moving from our current apartment to these other two. Okay. Any questions on that before I kind of keep moving? Once again, I'll try to get better about looking up there. So we can also think about things, you know, what's the marginal cost of studying for an additional hour, right? So if I study for an additional hour, I'm going to have to give up some things that I'd rather be doing with an hour. Yeah. It often is, in almost all the examples we will, but theoretically, marginal cost could be negative, right? Think about why. Let's say I flip this around. It's a good question. So let's say, and we won't think about marginal cost because those won't deal with deals. Let's say I was currently in this apartment and then I switched to apartment 3. What would my marginal cost be there? My costs actually went down. So in that case, yes, you can have negative margin. It's kind of weird. And once we kind of get into firm decision making, things like that, it's never really negative, because if we're making the optimal decision, we should always be starting out in the apartment that has the lowest cost, which is why I set it up that way, right? If we're choosing optimally, we're always going to start out at that lowest cost anyway. So yeah, marginal cost would then always be positive. But if people were acting or behaving suboptimally, there potentially could, theoretically, there could be negative marginal costs. But I won't throw any examples like that at you or try to confuse you with that. But that is a good question, thinking about it the right way. So I said, what are the marginal costs of studying, driving, right? A lot of it's just going to be what's the value of your time? What could you have been doing with that time? Okay. Marginal benefits are going to be really, really similar. So I said there's this additional cost, marginal cost. Marginal benefit just means the additional benefit you get from doing something. Now, I try to paint a lot of these early examples in the context of you, like individual, what's the benefit to you from choosing to do something? But we could look at this through the company's lens as well, right? What's the additional benefit typically to companies? Money, revenues. We can kind of calculate profits down the road. So we're thinking about additional benefits associated with making a decision or making a choice, right? And maybe the choice is to produce another unit if I'm a company. So we can kind of think about what's the marginal benefit if I accept a job offer? Wages, salary, right? Or hourly wage, I guess. Working additional hour, whatever my hourly wage is, selling another gallon of gas for the company. Well, that's how much profit can I make from selling that gallon of gas? Or not profit, I should say. How much revenue can I make from selling that gallon of gas? What's the value to me from being an economics instructor teacher? Well, I do get paid to be here, right? So that's part of the benefit. But in these first three, I always kind of say, I was just saying, it's money, money, money. It's not always money, right? I tell you, the econ PhD, you can go out and you can make a lot more money than I'm making now if you work for some of these Fortune 500 companies, right? But I find a lot of value in this job. I really enjoy it. It brings me a lot of additional benefit, especially kind of interacting with a lot of you, seeing light bulbs click on when we're talking about different issues, or when people stop by during office hours and I explain something. I enjoy it. That's a huge benefit to me, which is why I chose to do this. This is an optimal decision for me, okay? But there is money involved as well. So sometimes we have money as the benefit, but there's also just how much happiness does it bring the individual? We do things because it makes us happy, right? There's people who give a lot of their time to nonprofits or just volunteer, right? You think about churches. People do stuff for churches all the time out of just the kindness of their heart because it's bringing them some internal value. Right? So we're not just going to think about just money when we think about benefits, although when we get to companies, spoiler alert, they typically act through just money, right? They don't have a lot of good, what word am I looking for? Like they're not, their motives are primarily profit driven, I should say. But then you can think about some other things too. Like there's some research out there, how much more people will pay for like a very similar house, but one has a view of like the landfill and the other is overlooking, you know, some beautiful beach or river or whatever it is. And people do pay substantially different amounts just for a view, right? There's work that's been done just to try to tease out how much they will pay, right? And then I've got this last one because it'll kind of work us into this next example. So what's the marginal benefit of a beer? We're going to use that to determine marginal decision-making and then optimal decision-making. These slides are blank. They will always be blank. A lot of times I will throw in blank slides when I am then going to do work up here on the document. So we didn't switch over and do anything on Tuesday. From here on out, I had someone ask me in the earlier section, because we're going to draw some graphs. Is this class a lot of graphs? Or are we going to draw graphs more in this class? That's mostly what I do up here, right? We're going to have a lot of graphical representations of all the different things that we're talking about, okay? So with that in mind, we'll switch this over. And I know there's a zoom button. There we go. So I use this example, and it's probably dumb. And none of you should have any idea what I'm talking about other than through movies or TV shows, right? But on a day like today, in fact, the very last time I had to mow the lawn, and it's like 90 degrees, I would pay a lot of money when I get done to go open my fridge and have an ice cold beer, right? And in fact, if I didn't have any in my fridge and my neighbor was like price gouging me, I'd probably give him something like, you know, sometimes if I'm in a bad enough mood and I need it, $25, right? That's the additional benefit it would bring to me in that moment, right? Okay, so what about the second beer, right? Is that going to bring a bunch of additional value to me? Well, it's going to bring some, but I've kind of already quenched that like feeling of heat. Obviously, I always like another beer, so I'm still valuing that second beer. But then I can continue on down the line, you know, maybe my marginal benefit for each additional one starts, and at some point my wife would probably argue it becomes negative because I can become non-productive and I can't do anything else for the rest of my day, right? So we can then think about, okay, I've got these marginal benefits, the additional benefit that I get from consuming more and more of this good, right? And this is a dumb beer example. You can think of this as anything. The one I always use to make a really extreme point is what's the marginal benefit to going from 0 cars to 1 car? Huge, right? Especially if you're not in a town like Bloomington where you can commute. I grew up in like a town of like 1,500 people. And so like you had to drive to do anything, right? And so having a car was like freedom, right? And so I would have paid a lot of money when I was in high school to have that first car. Now, that's a huge marginal benefit to me, right? That first car, huge additional benefit to my life. What about then buying a second car? Well, I can only drive one of them at a time. So, I mean, yeah, maybe I kind of like this second car. It's a fun thing to drive. Like maybe it's an old Jeep and I can take the doors off and everything, but it's not near as valuable. It doesn't have near as much benefit to me as that first one. So there's a general kind of rule of thumb that as we buy more and more of a good, or we consume more and more of it, our marginal benefit is declining, right? You can think of any example. You know, another example would be, I think I brought it up earlier when someone was asking me. So if you study for that, if you don't study at all, that very first hour you study for a test is going to improve your score dramatically. It has a huge marginal benefit to you, right? And then, you know, you study the second hour and it's helpful, but right, going from 0 to 1, like nothing to something, you know, it's not quite as large. And then at some point, you know, you get to like the 10th hour studying. I mean, you're just looking at the same stuff. You already know the answers ahead of time. You're probably getting marginal benefits close to 0 at that point, right? So as we do more of something, as we buy more of something, our marginal benefit is going to be declining. Okay. So when we think about making optimal decisions, excuse me, let's run with my stupid beer after mowing the lawn example and say I don't have any beer in my fridge, and my neighbor says, look, we'll say kind of my, well, price or marginal cost. He says he'll sell me beers at $7 a pop, right? I'm like, okay, the marginal benefit I would get from buying that first beer, way larger than the additional cost. So you can almost think about the difference between marginal benefit and marginal cost. That's like my net gain, right? The value that I got from consuming this was worth $25 to me. I didn't put the dollar sign down here, but like worth $25 to me. The cost is only $7. I've got like kind of a net benefit of what, 18? Well, what about this second one? So yeah, I'll buy the first beer from him. But what about the second? Marginal benefit's still greater than the marginal cost. So I buy that one. What about the third? Just barely, but yes. What about the fourth? Well, now that additional cost is greater than the additional benefit. So no, I'm not going to choose to consume that fourth one or buy that fourth one. I'll stop at 3. So when we think about marginal, right, that's the change. So after I buy that first or consume that first beer, the change in my total benefit, right? Yes, if I was calculating total benefits, I'd be doing like a running log, right? And then here I'd do what? 43, etc. But notice, going from 1 to 2, the change in my total benefit was 10. Right? So marginal benefits don't accumulate, right? It's kind of like, so each additional question you get correct adds a certain number of points to an exam, right? That's the marginal benefit of getting that question correct. You have a total number of questions correct, which give you your final grade, right? Each question or each thing you consume, it's only adding a smaller amount, right? It's adding something to that total. Does that help clarify? Any other questions on this idea? I often get one question a lot here. I made the example in such a way that you might not be able to anticipate this. Let me see if I can better Sharpie markers in here. I think I'm all 9 on me. So sometimes what can happen, and I won't throw an example like this out at you yet, we will eventually run into this problem. So here it was kind of nice because every time I had the marginal benefit was either greater or it was less than, right? So we typically say, okay, I will choose to buy or I will choose to do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, right? Well, what happens if they're equal to each other? The marginal benefit is exactly equal to the marginal cost, and I choose to buy that good. What's my net benefit? 0. What if I didn't buy it? My net benefit would be 0. So I'm what we say indifferent. If my marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost, I say I'm indifferent at that point. I could buy it or not, and I'd be equally as well off. Right? So I think it's a little bit tricky. And generally what we say is, though, I'll continue to consume or continue to do something up to the point where they're equal. Now, at that point, we can't say whether or not I do it because I'm just as well off either way. Okay? I won't throw any examples at you, though, where you have to stop on an equal point. It'll always be something like this, at least for this first module. We'll deal with the kind of quality thing in some later modules. Is there anything else I want to say here? I think we're good. And it's this idea of like marginal. I sometimes talk in an economic way and add other things. Yeah. So in this class, we'll kind of keep everything linear. There are probably, let me think of something where that might happen. You know, I think you could probably tell a story. So we're actually going to get to a graph, but here I have kind of my marginal benefit is declining. If I wanted to draw that graphically, it would look like that, right? You could probably tell me a scenario when it comes to like studying that first hour is really valuable, but it also like allows me to like get the concepts down enough so that the second hour is actually a little bit more valuable, because I'm no longer wasting time with small things that won't really help me. I had to like build my base of knowledge just to be able to understand the more difficult concepts. So you could probably argue with like studying that marginal benefit might initially have an uptick to it, but eventually it's going to decline. Eventually, everything the marginal benefit is going to start declining. But in practice, probably, it's a fair question. There probably are certain scenarios where maybe for the first few units, we see this kind of initial increase in marginal benefit. You're thinking about a good way. Any other questions before we keep moving here? Okay. So with this idea of marginal benefits and marginal costs, I kind of already jumped the gun, but we can draw this out graphically. So think of this quantity on my x-axis, and then just kind of dollar amounts of the value in terms of dollars on my y-axis. So we already said that as I consume more of something, as I buy more of something, my marginal benefit is typically declining. You might have this initial uptake, but we're generally only even going to be concerned with this downward part, because if my marginal benefit was increasing, I'm always going to keep choosing to do more. Right? As I buy more of something, what's going to happen to my marginal costs? Well, if we think about it, if I'm spending $1 on a bottle of water, that maybe is $1 I would have spent on like a pack of gum. And I don't really value that much. So my opportunity cost, the benefit I would get from getting the pack of gum instead of this bottle of water I bought, really small, right? But as I buy more and more bottles of water, if I spend on that 100th bottle of water, well, I now have given up, I might not have enough money in my pocket now to be able to eat lunch, and that's going to have a much higher value, right? So as we spend more and more money on something, our opportunity costs, we always have to start giving up, first I might give up a pack of gum, something I don't really care about. Then the next dollar I spend, I've got to give up something the next highest value thing. So our opportunity costs will always be increasing as we buy more of something. Or if you want to think about it in terms of time, if I were to give up the time of my day, so let's say I don't know, I really like playing video games or something, right? I will choose the hour to play video games that has the lowest cost to me, right? I'm not going to hopefully play it during when I should be in class, because then I won't get a good grade. That's a huge opportunity cost. But 8 o'clock at night, I'm in my room, I don't have anything else to do, that's probably the hour that I'm going to use. But if I continue to use my time, put more and more hours towards video games, eventually I have to start giving up things, giving up time periods that had more value to me. I was doing things in those time blocks that had a lot more value. And I'm not going to give those up first, right? But eventually, as I give up, put more and more hours towards playing video games, I'm going to have to start giving up things that I value at a higher and higher amount. So because of this idea of opportunity costs, we're going to end up with that as we buy more of something, our marginal costs are increasing. Okay? Like I said, you can think of it in terms of time. I'm giving up my most valuable or my least valuable hours first, and then more and more valuable hours subsequently. Or I'm giving up, that first dollar that I spent, I'm not going to spend it on something I didn't care about, but eventually I'll start taking money away from things that I really, really do value. Okay? So now that we have this graphical representation of these increasing marginal costs and these decreasing marginal benefits, we can think about, okay, and this isn't to scale by any means, but would I buy that first one? Well, the marginal cost is much lower than the marginal benefit. So yeah, I would consume that first unit of whatever good we're thinking about. Or I put that first hour towards whatever activity we were thinking about we wanted to start putting our time towards. What about the second? Well, marginal benefit is still way greater than marginal cost. So yes. Third, it's like yes. Fourth, well, that's where now the marginal cost is slightly above our marginal benefit. So if I actually choose to buy that fourth unit, the benefit I get is less than what it cost me. It would be a dumb decision, right? I have a negative net benefit now, right? So we wouldn't choose to buy that fourth. The optimal kind of consumption would be a quantity of 3, or spend 3 hours on playing video games, or buy, consume 3 beers after you mow the lawn, buy 3 bottles of water, whatever the good is or we're thinking about. Okay. Does this make sense? Any questions on this? Okay. We'll keep moving here. So everybody got this okay if I switch back to the slides here. So once again, anytime I do something on this dot cam, it's not being recorded on that Zoom thing, Zoom recording, Zoom thing. So anytime I do something up here, it's a good idea to be writing it down and taking notes, okay? And like I said, a lot of what we'll be doing up here is a lot of graphs, especially as we get into subsequent modules. So switch back here. All right, so we've got, oh, got plenty of time. Excuse me. So we'll talk about this now. It won't pop up a ton, although it's going to be kind of living behind the scenes in a lot of what we do throughout the semester. So there are some things which we call positive statements in economics. So this is what people are actually doing. These are facts, right? So a lot of times these are numbers. I can go look at, see on average, how many hours do people spend on their phone, right? Your phone companies, they track everything you do on your phone. You can get your hands on that data. You can figure out on average, how many hours a day do people spend on their phone, right? Maybe it's 3.5 hours. That's a positive statement. It's a fact. Or, people on average, if we look at people's salaries and then how much they end up putting into a savings account or, whatever, mutual funds or however they're saving, on average only save 5% of their income. That would be a positive statement, okay? It's a fact. We got it from looking at data. Okay? A normative statement is something more we're going to be saying, this is what people should be doing. Based off of our estimates of the costs and the benefits, this is what the optimal decision, or this is what people should be doing, right? So they're just opinions, right? Normative economic statements are opinions. So this would be something like people should be saving more than 5% of their income because, once you retire, once you're old, your healthcare costs go way up. You want to make sure you have a lot of money for after you're done working, after you retire. So people should be, if we look at the data, look out there, people aren't saving enough. A normative statement is saying that they should save more than 5%. Okay. So a lot of times we think about these they're just opinions, right? And if you guys haven't seen The Big Lebowski, you definitely should. It's a cult classic. It's also extremely hilarious. So we've got these positive, these normative statements. We kind of start to think about why is economics called a social science, right? Well, we can observe these things that we make positive statements on, the actual facts, and then based off of our modeling, right? And as dumb as it was, like this was a model. And so it was making a prediction about what the optimal consumption should be. Based off our models, we then want to go out and look at the data and see if they hold up, right? So we still follow the scientific method. We develop a theory, right? My theory here was as simple as people do something as long as the additional benefit is greater than the additional cost. I then go out, maybe design some type of experiment where I can test this, right? So maybe I gather data. A lot of times, so there's actually here at IU, the econ department is very strong in a field called experimental economics. So I will try to get a link up on Canvas because I'm pretty sure there's a way to sign up for it. I don't know if they're using Orsi or what they're using, but you can actually participate in them and earn a little bit of money. So they have participants, they come in, they have these very well thought out experiments to try to, in the lab, tease out what decisions people would make. And so they come up with this experiment. They then have volunteers, they collect all the data, and they're like all hypothetical decision making. So it's like a lot of them are like, you'll even be a company and you'll make production decisions and all kinds of things, right? So once you collect that data, you then revisit your model and say, okay, is that model supported by the data? Or do we need to think a little bit harder? Is there something that we weren't thinking about? And we might then have to update that theory, right? To kind of match up with what we see play out in the data, okay? Any questions on that? This is nothing crazy here, but this is why we do call economics a social science. We still kind of follow this scientific method. Okay. It's just our experiments look a lot different than chemistry. So another thing that we'll be using throughout this semester is, and I kind of already did it with the apartment example, is a lot of the time they're going to assume things away, right? I assumed that the apartments were all exactly the same, right? They had all the same amenities because I was just wanting to get at how does this opportunity cost of time impact decision making? Well, I could complicate this model even more if I didn't hold those things constant. What if I say, okay, well, one of the apartment complexes has a pool. Well, now if I don't choose that one, there's a huge opportunity cost to choosing the apartments that don't have a pool, right? And what if, the other one, instead of a 1 bedroom, it's 2 bedrooms, right? Well, now if I don't choose that one, there's a huge opportunity cost in not choosing. So we want to try to hold all these other variables constant so that we can just get at one, what we call causal relationship. Is this thing causing the other, is one variable causing the other to change without any distracting things, getting involved? We're assuming everything else is exactly the same. This is kind of hard to do in practice, although if you continue, so how many of you, well, I know you don't have to declare yet, but want to be finance majors? A decent amount of you. So you would probably eventually get to some courses where you're going to do some of this. In fact, I have a couple right now in my econometrics course for finance majors. But you come up with statistical methods of essentially being able to hold all other things constant. So it's something called linear regression. Once you get to higher level econ or finance, you'll talk about this. And there's statistical ways which we can hold a lot of these other things constant, even though we know that in practice they're always changing. Everything's changing, right? There's a million different things that can be changing. Okay. So we want to try to get at this kind of like causal relationship. We'll kind of assume a lot of things away. And in this class, I had some people ask me in my other section, I was drawing these out linear. And they're like, well, wouldn't it really kind of like be like exponential maybe? And yeah, in this class, we're going to keep everything, the math. The reason why you only need a very basic calculator, everything's going to be linear, right? At the very most, the highest level of algebra you'll have to do is set 2 equations equal to each other and solve for one variable, okay? So we're thinking about, very simple models because we have to walk before we can run. This is an introduction to economics, right? If you then went to like intermediate micro, now we start to just deal with more complicated functions that probably do match up more what we see in the real world. Just we got to walk before we can run, right? We got to understand these models with linear functions before we can kind of make it even more complicated. So let's see if I can get this to work. I was having issues on my one computer. I think this is going to work. We got the spinning wheel here. So as I'm waiting for it to open, from memory, it's an article from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and they went out and gathered all this data, and they were trying to come up with what's the returns to a college education, right? So there's a lot of people who like to bash on going to college and it's not worth it and et cetera, et cetera. Well, they actually went out and started collecting a bunch of data. There's the most interesting one. So you kind of think about, here's the earnings difference between workers with and without a college degree. Here was 1980, here's 2000, here's 2010. It's still growing, although it's kind of for the older individuals starting to, by the time you're 65, it doesn't matter if you have a college education because you're probably too ornery to learn new things. And now you're not as skillful of a worker, attractive in the workforce. That's kind of why that gap closes. But there's an increasing premium, or you can make more money with a college degree than if you don't have one. And this is all on average. So we come down here. This is a nice kind of summary table. They kind of broke this down and look at the average, or median, sorry, not average, median earnings for different kind of levels of education, and also the unemployment rate. And sure enough, I mean, if you look at kind of going from high school degree to a bachelor's degree, bachelor's to master's, expected salary is always increasing. As you gain more and more skills, what do you also become? A little bit less expendable, and people want you a lot more, and so you're less likely to be unemployed, right? So this comes out of actual data. This is a positive statement, right? They kind of broke it down too by, they did some other stuff in here that's not worth mentioning, but they broke it down by gender, race. Just kind of interesting. I like to try to throw in little things, little articles here and there that support kind of some of the stuff that we're talking about. So this one, they have some model they believe would predict what the earnings should be. So there's like a theory that predicted it should be about 50%, right? So if you go through, kind of calculate it, you can actually see that it's a little bit higher than that based off of this data. Now, this was like not every single person in the US, but it was a pretty large data set. But we can kind of go out, we have this theory, we go out, the experiment sometimes is just collecting data on individuals. Once we have that data, we can then kind of see is the returns to a college education pretty consistent with what our theory predicted. It's a little bit off here. Maybe we need to kind of revisit what are these additional, maybe there's an even larger gain to having this college degree. So kind of stupid, but I put another link in here. It's just got some earnings and education. It's another article kind of going through showing how much of a return there is to having a college education, right? So when we look at these effects, we also have to be a little bit careful. And I can kind of get a little excited sometimes talking about these things and forget that you don't live in my world, right? So we're talking about these effects. We're thinking about the average effect, right? That was the average return. There are plenty of people who get a college degree and then waste it, end up working at a job that they could have probably gotten right out of high school. The value to their degree was really nothing, right? They're making the same as if they wouldn't have went. Now, there's also some people who never go to college, right? Who come up with some idea, start a company, and then they're making millions of dollars, right? So it's not going to be true for every single person. When we talk about these effects, when we talk about relationship in this class, we're always talking about the average, right? You can always find like a case where it's not true for any one individual, right? But on average, we see that these theories predict that there's going to be, a positive return to education, and we can try to put like an amount to that, okay? So you can argue these by anecdotes, but just because one situation, just because there's one person who made more money with a high school degree than a lot of people with a college degree, that doesn't completely dismiss the theory, right? The theory is talking about the average, and there will always be exceptions. Also, I think kind of interesting, this might be in the slides, so you want to know ahead of time, or this might not be surprising, but we're also talking about like correlation versus causation. We also want to be careful. This is the reason why we try to hold things constant, and we do eventually get to running these regression techniques to understand a lot of these, to work with a lot of the data to understand if our theories are true. It's because if I look at ice cream sales and child drowning deaths, they are highly positively correlated. I don't think anybody's going to argue that ice cream is causing kids to be too full and like drown, right? What's causing both of these things? When it's hotter, people are in pools more. People are buying more ice cream, right? There's likely a third factor that's kind of driving both of these things, okay? Did I go through the flu vaccine example with you guys on Tuesday? No? Okay, good. Maybe you'll like this, maybe not. Another good example of this is if you look at the data, there is actually, there could potentially be, I don't have the data, I'm just putting on a thought experiment. It's kind of interesting to think about, that there could be a negative relationship if you're looking at getting the flu vaccine and actually dying from the flu. That people who get the flu vaccine are actually a little bit more likely to die from the flu. Doesn't make any sense, right? We start thinking about, well, who's getting, how many of you get the flu vaccine? A couple hands, right? You're young. I'll tell you I probably shouldn't, but I never get the flu vaccine because I don't want to take the time. I generally don't get sick, knock on wood. And if I get the flu, it'll suck for 24 hours, but I'll live, right? If I was 85, I can guarantee you I'd be getting the flu vaccine because if I get the flu, it might be the last time I get it, right? So who's getting flu vaccines are people who are going to be more at risk to dying from the flu, right? So often we have these like what we call selection issues where we've got to think about, just because we see this positive or negative correlation, we have to think about, well, why, or is this one variable higher? Or why am I, in my example, what's the type of person who's more likely to get the flu vaccine versus not, okay? So that kind of ends it for module 1. If there aren't any questions, probably kind of go open those practice problems and we'll kind of work through a few that I think might be helpful for this first quiz, which I have set to release at 4:30. It will be due when? Yeah, the end of the day, Monday. What's also due at the end of the day, Monday? Both those 2 module readings, okay? Next week, we'll start using Top Hat in class for those in-class participation point questions. So make sure you get registered, have that ready to go for Tuesday, okay? All right. Any questions for me before we jump into things? Yeah. So I'm not going to put anything up for Packback until after next week's classes. So I'll probably talk about that Thursday. I will kind of have that assignment ready to go after class on Thursday, and we'll talk more about that Thursday's class. Yep. Any other questions? You good? Okay. So I've got these practice problems pulled up. And this first quiz hopefully is going to be like everyone's highest quiz. All right. It should be one of the easier ones. 5 or 6 of the questions come from the syllabus. I can't remember the exact split. 5 or 6 of them come from like what we talked about today and the end of last class, that module 1 material. And then there's one question at the end, which everybody's going to get right, because I'm simply asking you whether or not you can see an image. I have some issues with Canvas about uploading images in multiple sections. I think I have the workaround, but I just want to make sure before we have questions where I'm like, hey, based off the image above, what is blah, 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 and you don't see the image. So I'm making sure that I've got the bugs worked out. If I don't, then I'm going to have to come up with a different solution. Probably just a little bit more work where I'm going to have to, you guys don't care. But it's going to help me out, that very last question. Just answer honestly whether or not you can see the picture. That lets me know everything's working right or it's not. Okay. But there's no right or wrong answer to it. Everyone will get full points. Okay. All right. So let's look at this first one. So let's say I've got 3 activities, and this probably isn't realistic, but let's say I probably could have added this to the question. Let's say they're all going to take me the same amount of time, right? So I'm choosing, I can only do one of these things with the amount of time that I have. I can golf, watch a movie, or take a nap, right? If I choose to go golfing, what is the opportunity cost of that choice? So the opportunity cost is the value of what we're giving up, the highest value thing that we're giving up. So my opportunity cost here, exactly. The thing I valued the most, I was giving up going to the movies, but I was also giving up, I wasn't choosing either one of these things, but the one that I was giving up that I valued the most was worth $62. So choosing to go golfing, I had an opportunity cost of, was it 62? All right. Any questions on that idea? Okay. What if I chose to go to the movie? What's my opportunity cost? Still 62, right? Because what's the value of the highest value thing that I'm giving up? Still napping at $62. Okay. Any questions on that idea? So I caught a couple of you on the second question, not saying 62. So it's the highest valued thing that I'm giving up. Yeah.
So if you take a nap,
so if he takes a nap, what's his opportunity cost? Now, the highest value thing that they're not doing is going to be going golfing at 36. Okay. Any other questions on that one before I keep jumping around a little bit? Okay. This one's, I think, kind of an easier one. Thing still about opportunity cost. So let's say I'm driving for Uber and I can make what, $20 an hour. I could have worked a 5-hour shift. Instead, I choose to go over to the upstairs pub and not work, right? What would the opportunity cost? Or I sit at a bar, going to the party. I guess I should. These don't match up, right? But yeah, what is it? 100, right? I gave up 5 hours. Each one I could have made $20. So I was giving up not making $100. Okay. And that's just the opportunity cost. So this is where sometimes people get tripped up. I could complicate this a little bit more. Let's say I'm going to go to the bar and spend $20 while I'm there. Well, what would my opportunity cost be? Still 100, right? Because that 20 that I'm spending at drinks at the bar, that is an explicit cost. That's not something I'm giving up. I'm just asking you about the opportunity cost of what they're giving up, right? And what they're giving up is working that 5 hours and making $100. Okay. Any questions on that one? Yeah. So the opportunity cost is independent of how much money you spend in the activity. So in my example, let's say I said spend $20, right? Well, it doesn't matter how much money I spend at the bar, I'm still giving up not making 100. So that opportunity cost, it doesn't matter. I could say, let's say I go out and I spend $50 on drinks, right? My opportunity cost, what I'm giving up is still that $100. Right? Nope. Opportunity cost is purely what I'm giving up. Now, if I instead, and I probably wouldn't ask you a question like this, but just because you're asking, what if I had asked you for the total cost? Well, now when I go out and spend $50, that's a cost, but I'm also giving up making 100. That's a cost. My total cost would be 150. So here I'm not asking you for a total cost. I'm asking you just, excuse me, just for the opportunity cost. Yep. Any other questions on that one? Okay. Yeah.
So the total cost is opportunity cost plus implicit cost.
And like I said, I'm not going to ask you a question with that yet. We will kind of dive into that. We end up calling it opportunity cost, implicit cost, and then we kind of talk about calculating totals. But for now, I would just be asking you a question about what that opportunity cost is. Okay. This is just kind of an easy one. Well, hopefully after what we talked about today, but maybe not. So let's say you could walk to where you want to go, but you could also take an Uber. It costs you $10, right? If you choose, you choose optimally and you choose to take the Uber ride, what has to be true, right? Yeah, so to you, getting in the Uber, the marginal cost is $10, right? So the only way that you're okay with doing that is if your marginal benefit is greater than that, right? So your marginal benefit would have to be greater than that marginal cost if you choose to do it. If we're thinking about you're behaving optimally or you're acting in your own self-interest. This one's maybe a little tricky, but we'll just start to think about it. Let's say I'm currently spending $50 on a phone plan. Well, I know this seems unreasonable, but we're just going to use these pretty basic numbers. Actually, this is an aside, but it's kind of interesting, and we have more than enough time. You're going to get out here a little bit early. My brother and I are still locked into a phone plan, and it's like $70 a month for the two of us. Like, so we pay $35 a month still. As much as I don't love T-Mobile all the time, I'm probably never going to leave them. But anyways, so that's why my numbers might be a little bit out of whack. I'm not exactly sure how much phone plans are right now. So we've got $50 and then let's say I want to upgrade to $75 account. What would my marginal cost be? Right? My change marginal, it's the change in my total cost. Right? So the additional cost here, I'm going from 50 to 75 would be that $25. Okay. This should be kind of an easy one. We basically worked through an example like this in class. What's the optimal number of beers for this individual to consume if the price is $7? Yep, the marginal benefit is greater for the first 4. It's not for the 5th, so we don't buy the 5th one. We stop at that 4th. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? Okay. Yeah, these I don't think are that tough. They're kind of based just off of what we went over today, so I won't kind of waste your time going through these. I'll put the answer keys up there though. If you have any questions over any of these practice problems, feel free to reach out. I will be in my office tomorrow from 12:30 to 3:30. I've had some people ask if they have to kind of schedule. It's open, just kind of drop in. Like I said, if my door's shut, I'll be there during that time slot. Before we get too loud, pack up. I can wait for another 15 minutes so you guys don't get out of here. All right. I'll wait another 15 minutes. All right, I'm starting to take the hint. Okay, I want you guys to get out of here. I was just going to say, just remind you one more time. And I'm okay putting up with awkward silences and doing stupid stuff like that. You really, before we're completely dismissed, try to not start talking. This room, acoustics, it gets very loud very quickly, even if it's only 25% of it. All right. So you've got those 2 module readings, the quiz, all due by the end of the day on Monday. If you're having any issues getting registered, please reach out to me as soon as possible. Other than that, have a fun, safe weekend, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.